We get the joy and we have the ability and the gift of being able to go on stage and still have our love affair because, you know, we were, for all practical purposes, married for a long time.
You know Stevie Nicks. Behind her swirling chiffon, the top hats, and decades of rock and roll mythos, she spent years guarding the rawest corners of her heart. But as time marched on, the legendary frontwoman stripped away the mystery, laying bare the passion, power plays, and soul-crushing heartbreaks that truly fueled her world. She was finally ready to speak the unfiltered truth about her life's true loves. Who actually held the key to the heart of rock's ultimate high priestess? The fire and the flame out, Joe Walsh. When Stevie Nicks speaks about Joe Walsh today, the tone in her voice shifts from the regal distance of a rock legend to the raw vulnerability of a woman who once touched absolute magic and lived to tell the tale. For decades, fans assumed her ultimate romantic story belonged to the partners she shared album covers with. But Nicks has repeatedly pulled back the curtain to reveal that the deepest, most agonizing spark of her life belonged to the Eagles guitarist. They met in the mid-'80s, a period when both were riding the crest of unimaginable global fame while simultaneously drowning in the chemical haze that consumed the era's biggest superstars. What began as a meeting of two towering creative minds quickly devolved into an all-consuming, high-octane romance that burned hot enough to melt everything around it. Nicks has described Walsh as her complete equal, a man whose musical genius, wicked humor, and wild spirit matched her own in ways no one else ever had. He was her absolute twin flame, the person who made her feel entirely seen in a world where everyone else wanted a piece of her persona. But that absolute reflection came with a terrifying dark side. Both Nicks and Walsh were locked in severe, escalating addictions to substance, creating an environment where extreme passion was constantly shadowed by imminent self-destruction. In her candid retrospectives, Nicks doesn't romanticize those days. She remembers them as a beautiful, terrifying fever dream where love and mortality were locked in a constant wrestling match. The tragic turning point of their relationship came not from a lack of love, but from a devastating realization of self-preservation. Nicks vividly recalls a moment of clarity while looking at Walsh, realizing that if they stayed together, one or both of them would not survive the decade. They were enabling each other's worst impulses, speeding toward an early grave at maximum velocity. It was Walsh who ultimately made the heartbreaking decision to walk away, making it clear to her that if they remained in each other's orbits, they were going to die. Breaking off the relationship was an act of brutal mercy, an agonizing sacrifice made because the love was too heavy for either of them to carry while trying to stay alive. The emotional fallout of that breakup, deeper than almost any other in her life. Nicks channeled the agonizing grief, longing, and lingering reverence into her music, most notably writing her haunting ballad, "Has Anyone Ever Written Anything for You?" as a direct tribute to Walsh and the profound loss he carried from his own past family tragedy. Even now, decades after the chemical smoke cleared and both artists found their way to sobriety, Nicks openly crowns Joe Walsh as the great love of her life. It was a romance born in the clouds and shattered by reality, leaving behind a permanent scar that she wears not with regret, but with a quiet, enduring pride. She survived the fire, but she never forgot the heat. Yet long before Joe Walsh entered the frame, there was a turbulent force that built her, broke her, and immortalized her. The musical crucible, Lindsey Buckingham. Before the sold-out stadiums and platinum records, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham were just two ambitious California kids sharing a single room, a hash pipe, and a dream. They met in high school when Nicks joined Buckingham's folk group, Fritz, but their artistic partnership quickly morphed into a fierce, all-consuming romantic bond. In those early years, the power dynamic was stark. Buckingham was the meticulous musical architect spending endless hours perfecting guitar riffs, while Nicks worked odd jobs, cleaning houses and waiting tables to pay their rent and support his vision. They were broke, hungry, and entirely dependent on each other, forging an intense codependent tie that would define the rest of their lives. When their debut duo album, Buckingham Nicks, flopped in 1973, it should have been the end of the road. Instead, it proved to be the golden ticket that caught the ear of Mick Fleetwood, setting off a chain reaction that catapulted them into rock history. Joining Fleetwood Mac transformed their private, struggling world into an international fishbowl, and the sudden shift destroyed what was left of their fragile romance. As the pressures of instant superstardom mounted, the personal cracks widened into massive chasms. By the time the band retreated to Sausalito to record Rumors in 1976, their relationship had completely imploded. Yet, instead of walking away, they did something almost psychotic. They stayed in the same room, picked up their instruments, and weaponized their breakup into music. Every studio session became a battlefield, where they hurled poetic daggers at each other through the studio monitors. When Buckingham sang the blistering line, "Packing up shifting gears" in Go Your Own Way, Nicks had to stand at the microphone and harmonize, absorbing the public insult in real time. In return, she handed him Silver Springs, a haunting piece of musical vengeance where she promised he would never escape the sound of her voice. That exquisite agony defined their dynamic for the next 4 decades. They were stuck in a perpetual emotional lock, chained to a band that forced them to perform their most painful intimate grievances in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans night after night. Nicks has spoken extensively about how bizarre and exhausting it was to stand on stage, look into Buckingham's eyes, and recreate the exact passion and heartbreak of their youth, long after the love had curdled into resentment. They were dynamic stage partners who locked eyes during guitar solos with an intensity that looked like pure romance, only to retreat to separate dressing rooms the second the lights went down. It was a relationship built on a fundamental contradiction. They couldn't live together, but their shared musical legacy meant they could never truly part ways. In her later retrospectives, Nicks describes Buckingham not as the simple love of her life, but as her destiny, her soulmate, and her ultimate creative rival. They built a musical empire out of the ashes of their failed romance, creating a catalog of music that outlasted their anger. Even after decades of public spats, quiet truces, and Buckingham's eventual firing from Fleetwood Mac in 2018, the bond between them remains an unshakable pillar of rock lore. They pushed each other to artistic heights neither could have reached alone, paying for their legendary catalog with the total destruction of their personal life. They gave up their private love to give the world timeless anthems, proving that sometimes the most powerful bonds are the ones that burn you to the ground. Love shaped her heart, but it was the brutal grind of the music machine that turned her into an icon. Life, hustle, and Fleetwood Mac. Stevie Nicks was not born into rock royalty. She forged her crown through sheer grit, hustle, and an unshakable refusal to be ignored. Born Stephanie Lynn Nicks in Phoenix, Arizona, she spent her childhood constantly moving between southwestern towns as her father climbed the corporate ladder. She picked up a deep love for roots music from her grandfather, a roaming country singer who taught her how to harmonize before she could even read. By 16, after receiving a Goya acoustic guitar for her birthday, she wrote her very first song and realized that music was her ultimate calling. But the real test of her endurance began when she made the terrifying decision to drop out of San Jose State University, walking away from a stable educational path to chase a career in the cutthroat music business with zero financial safety net. While Lindsey Buckingham spent endless days locked away in their apartment, honing guitar arrangements, Nicks became the sole financial engine keeping their lives afloat. She worked grueling, exhausting shifts as a restaurant waitress and cleaned houses across Los Angeles just to pay for their rundown rental unit and keep their musical dreams alive. When Mick Fleetwood invited Buckingham to join Fleetwood Mac on New Year's Eve, 1974, Buckingham delivered a firm ultimatum. They were a package deal, or he wouldn't join at all. Stepping into Fleetwood Mac was a massive cultural shock. The band was an established, weary British blues outfit trying to reinvent itself, and Nicks was walking into an intense, high-stakes studio environment entirely dominated by male musicians. She immediately understood that if she wanted to survive, she needed a strong, undeniable ally. She found that partner in Christine McVie, the group's brilliant keyboardist and co-lead songwriter. In an era where female rock stars were routinely pitted against each other by executives, producers, and the music press, Nicks and McVie made a sacred pact to stand shoulder to shoulder. They promised never to be sidelined, talked over, or treated as second-class backing vocalists. They formed an ironclad sisterhood that completely shifted the internal power dynamic of Fleetwood Mac forever, creating a united front that demanded equal pay, equal album space, and complete respect. Together, their soaring, distinct vocal harmonies turned Fleetwood Mac's self-titled 1975 album and the 1977 masterpiece, Rumours, into unstoppable global juggernauts, forever changing the trajectory of popular culture. Yet, as the band rose to unfathomable levels of international fame, Nicks faced a brand new battle, establishing a distinct visual and artistic identity that belonged entirely to her. She instinctively knew that to command the massive stadium stages they were now filling, she needed to create a striking, unforgettable persona. Working closely with designer Margie Kent, she meticulously crafted her legendary signature aesthetic, a romantic Gothic blend of flowing chiffon dresses, top hats, thick velvet platform boots, and trailing black shawls. She looked less like a traditional lead singer and more like an ethereal, mystical priestess stepped right out of a dark fairy tale. That dramatic bohemian image wasn't just a stylish costume. It was a psychological suit of armor that protected her fragile inner self from the harsh realities of global stardom. It gave her the power to hold tens of thousands of people completely spellbound with a simple turn of her tambourine or a swirl of her skirt. In a cutthroat, deeply sexist industry that tried to package female artists into conventional pop molds, Nicks seized complete control of her own image, her publishing, and her stage presence. She transformed herself from a broke California girl cleaning houses into the undisputed queen of rock and roll, creating an iconic blueprint that generations of female songwriters would spend the next several decades trying to emulate. She didn't just sing the songs, she crafted the anthems that defined multiple generations. The craft. Stevie does not write songs the way traditional pop craftspeople do. She extracts them directly from the pages of her private soul. Long before a melody ever touches a keyboard or a guitar, her tracks begin as raw, sprawling prose typed out on a portable German typewriter late at night, in darkened hotel rooms or quiet corners of her home. For decades, she has maintained massive leather-bound journals, books as thick as telephone directories, where she pours out her unedited thoughts, dreams, and personal heartbreaks. From those prose entries, she painstakingly distills lines of pure poetry onto the left side of the page, transforming chaotic real-life grief into tightly structured, rhyming stanzas. Once the verse is carved onto paper, she sits alone at a piano, lighting candles and burning incense, striking simple chords until the vocal melody locks into place. Her genius lies in an uncanny ability to turn deeply specific, highly personal domestic wars into universal mythologies that millions of strangers can instantly recognize. Take Dreams, a track famously written in a mere 10 minutes while lounging in Sly Stone's velvet-draped studio room during the tense Rumours sessions. Using only 2 simple repeating chords, Nicks built an entire emotional universe about detachment and self-preservation. delivering an icy warning to Lindsey Buckingham that proved so irresistible it became Fleetwood Mac's only #1 single in the United States. Then there is Landslide, written in Aspen, Colorado, while staring at snow-capped mountains and contemplating the terrifying choice between quitting music to go back to school or pushing forward into the unknown with Buckingham. That quiet acoustic ballad captured the universal fear of aging, change, and watching one's carefully constructed world crumble, becoming an immortal generational torch song. Nicks excels at translating physical sensations and fleeting moments into cinematic narratives. Her signature hit, Edge of 17, was born out of the double grief of losing her uncle to cancer and mourning John Lennon in late 1980, blended with a misheard phrase from Tom Petty's wife, Jane, who said they met at the age of 17. Nicks misheard it as Edge and instantly constructed a frantic, chugging masterpiece centered on the image of a white-winged dove taking flight. In her lyrics, breakups are not just sad endings. They are grand Gothic dramas filled with dark feathered birds, velvet lace, shifting winds, and mystical metaphors. She creates immersive, dreamlike worlds for her listeners to step into, making them feel as if they are peeking directly into her private diary while wrapped in a velvet cloak. Technically, her style relies on striking vocal phrasing and pentatonic vocal melodies, anchored by simple, driving harmonic structures. She isn't interested in overly complex jazz chords or technical musical gymnastics. She focuses entirely on the emotional weight of her delivery, utilizing her distinctive gravelly alto and emotive vibrato to pull absolute conviction out of every syllable. By keeping her musical foundations clean and accessible, her poetic lyrics take center stage, cutting straight to the listener's core. She turned her personal diaries into timeless cultural monuments, proving that raw, vulnerable truth is the most potent instrument in the history of rock music. That raw, creative impulse spilled out far beyond single tracks, building a vast legacy across records and screens. The archive. Nicks did not limit her creative ambition to Fleetwood Mac. She constructed a massive solo empire that proved she was an unstoppable hitmaker entirely on her own terms. It all began in 1981 with her debut solo record, Belladonna, an absolute masterclass in rock that skyrocketed straight to #1 on the Billboard charts. Spawning timeless tracks like Stop Draggin' My Heart Around with Tom Petty and the soaring Leather and Lace with Don Henley, the record declared that Nicks was no longer dependent on Fleetwood Mac's machinery. She followed that colossal debut with a string of hit solo albums throughout the decade and beyond, including The Wild Heart in 1983, Rock a Little in 1985, The Other Side of the Mirror in 1989, and Street Angel in 1994. Even as the music landscape radically shifted, she kept evolving, dropping critically acclaimed records like Trouble in Shangri-La in 2001, In Your Dreams in 2011, and 24 Karat Gold, Songs from the Vault in 2014, proving her poetic well never ran dry. Her magnetic, witchy aesthetic naturally spilled over into film and television, turning her into a screen pop culture icon. Beyond composing standout cinematic tracks like Practical Magic, Crystal, she made unforgettable appearances on television. Her most famous screen moment arrived when showrunner Ryan Murphy invited her to guest star in American Horror Story, Coven. Playing a fictionalized version of herself, a white witch who bestows her mystical gifts upon the Academy, Nicks introduced her legendary persona to a whole new generation of younger viewers. She returned to the franchise for American Horror Story, Apocalypse, cementing her place as a pop culture deity who blurred the line between urban myth and living legend. She proved that whether she was standing behind a studio microphone or stepping onto a television set, her presence alone commanded total attention. On stage, Nicks remains an absolute touring titan whose stadium tickets sell out in minutes. Across 5 decades, her world tours, both as the centerpiece of Fleetwood Mac and as a solo headliner, have grossed hundreds of millions of dollars, filling arenas with multiple generations of fans dressed in black lace, top hats, and velvet. Whether performing iconic marathon shows with Fleetwood Mac like the legendary 1997 The Dance Reunion, or embarking on massive solo co-headlining runs across the globe, her live shows are legendary theatrical events. She treats every concert like a sacred ceremony, complete with dramatic costume changes, elaborate light displays, and intimate, personal stories shared directly with her audience between songs, keeping the golden age of stadium rock alive. That towering body of work earned her a place in rock and roll history that no female artist before her had ever achieved. In 1998, she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as an integral member of Fleetwood Mac. Then, in 2019, history was made when she was inducted a second time for her solo career, making her the very first woman ever inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice. Add to that multiple Grammy nominations, the BMY Icon Award, and endless Lifetime Achievement honors, and her catalog stands as a testament to pure creative resilience. She shattered the glass ceiling of a male-dominated music industry, turning her solo archive into a permanent monument of female empowerment. Behind the glitter, the awards, and the sold-out arenas, a dangerous shadow was quietly taking over her life. Her health, addiction, and survival. The shimmering silk and soaring melodies concealed a harrowing reality. Stevie Nicks spent years waging an agonizing war for her own survival against extreme chemical dependencies and life-threatening medical crises. By the early 80s, the punishing demands of stadium tours and endless recording sessions were fueled by an alarming substance addiction. The substance wasn't just a party vice, it became a toxic crutch that nearly destroyed her physical body. The rock and roll lifestyle came to a crashing halt when a plastic surgeon examined her nose and delivered a terrifying warning. The substance had burned a massive, permanent hole directly through her nasal septum, a perforation so severe that her doctor warned a single additional dose could trigger a fatal brain aneurysm or permanently ruin her vocal cords. Realizing she was standing on the absolute precipice of death, Nicks checked herself into the Betty Ford Center in 1986, enduring a brutal rehab stint to purge the illicit substance from her system forever. Yet, escaping substance only pushed her into a far darker, insidiously legal trap. To help manage her post-rehab anxiety and prevent a relapse, a psychiatrist prescribed her the heavy-duty benzodiazepine Klonopin. What was supposed to be a temporary chemical bridge turned into an 8-year nightmare that Nicks describes as the absolute lowest point of her existence. The legally prescribed sedative hijacked her life far more completely than substance ever had. It dulled her sharp creative mind, eroded her vibrant personality, robbed her of her 30s, and caused her weight to swell. In her candid retrospectives, Nicks lays bare the profound anger she carries for the medical system that stole nearly a decade of her youth. Detoxing from Klonopin in 1993 required an agonizing 47-day hospital stay, complete with severe tremors and physical agony, but her sheer willpower pulled her through to absolute lasting sobriety. Surviving those severe chemical battlegrounds was only part of her health odyssey. Her body bore the physical scars of a life lived at maximum volume. Over the years, Nicks has fought off severe health scares that threatened to derail her career. She survived a frightening, life-threatening bout of double pneumonia that landed her in intensive care, making her fiercely protective of her respiratory health and her vocal power. On stage, she has pushed through excruciating physical conditions, including a painful leg infection that required emergency surgery during a European tour and a painful shoulder fracture that forced her to temporarily pause her rigorous concert schedule. Despite every physical setback, every chemical trap, and every near-fatal medical emergency, Stevie Nicks refused to be buried by her trauma. She emerged from the physical ruins of the rock and roll machine entirely clean, deeply grounded, and completely in command of her health. Her story transformed from a classic cautionary tale of mid-century rock decadence into a triumphant narrative of pure resilience. She didn't just survive the darkest shadows of fame. She dragged herself back into the light, reclaiming her body, her mind, and her music with an unshakable determination that remains an inspiration to millions. Having conquered her darkest demons, how does the Queen of Rock view love, identity, and life today? The unbroken voice. As the decades marched on, Stevie Nicks refused to fade into a comfortable, quiet retirement or coast solely on nostalgic throwbacks. Instead, she leaned directly into her role as an active, fiercely vocal rock matriarch, turning her lifelong platform into a weapon for social advocacy and new artistic expression. When reproductive rights were rolled back across the United States, Nicks didn't just express dismay on social media. She went straight back to her piano, channeling her raw outrage into her fierce anthem, The Lighthouse. She delivered a soaring, unapologetic rallying cry that proved her pen was as sharp and relevant in her 70s as it was during the golden era of rock. Standing on national television stages and screaming through studio monitors, she reminded the world that a true artist never stops fighting for the vulnerable. Her dedication to her audience on stage remains an absolute phenomenon of physical endurance. Even when faced with late career injuries, like a severe shoulder fracture that temporarily halted her whirlwind schedule, she refused to hang up her tambourine. Instead, she endured physical therapy, rescheduled her shows, and returned to stadium stages with an explosive energy that put artists half her age to shame. Every time she steps out under the spotlight in her signature black boots and trailing shawls, she commands arenas with the same electric authority she possessed in 1977. Her concerts are not mere performances, they are triumphant celebrations of longevity, proving that time may march on, but true rock icons are entirely timeless. That commitment to her solo journey became even more profound following the heartbreaking passing of her twin flame sister and Fleetwood Mac bandmate, Christine McVie, in late 2022. The loss severed the core of Fleetwood Mac, with Nicks openly declaring that the band could never exist without McVie's grounding presence and brilliant spirit. Rather than letting that devastating loss crush her creative drive, Nicks took on the monumental responsibility of carrying their shared musical legacy forward entirely on her own shoulders. She incorporates tributes to McVie into her live sets, keeping their historic sisterhood alive through every chord and harmony. She stands tall as the last high priestess of her era, turning private grief into public celebration every single night. Nicks has proven that age is not a limitation, but a badge of honor forged through decades of survival. She continues to write, record, and dominate global stages on her own terms, refusing to bow to industry expectations or quiet down. Her voice, weathered by time and victory, carries the weight of a woman who has lived 10 lifetimes and emerged victorious. She isn't just preserving rock history, she is actively writing its modern chapters, proving that the fire inside her burns just as hot as it did when she first stepped into the light. As the last standing high priestess of her era, how does she navigate love, identity, and her ultimate legacy today? Orientation, and finally, independence. In her later years, Stevie Nicks stands as a monumental figure who has completely redefined what it means to age as an independent woman in the global spotlight. Her deliberate choice to remain single and unattached is not a story of loneliness, but a grand statement of personal liberty. She openly speaks about how her art was always her primary partner, viewing her freedom as a non-negotiable state of being rather than a missing piece of her life. Over the decades, Persistent public curiosity and speculation surrounded her fluid, romantic stage presence and deep bonds, leading many to question her sexual orientation. Nicks addressed these whispers with characteristic grace, embracing her status as a legendary ally and beloved gay icon without ever feeling the need to box herself into conventional labels. She celebrates love in all its shapes, proving that true romantic spirit transcends rigid boundaries. Today, her daily existence is anchored in a disciplined, peaceful sobriety that she fought decades to secure. Having conquered the chemical storms that once threatened to consume her, she lives fully present, prioritizing her mental clarity, physical health, and personal artistic space. Her home is her sanctuary, a peaceful retreat filled with her journals, her pianos, and her beloved dogs, far removed from the chaotic demands of the stadium circuit. Yet, even in her quiet moments, she remains an active, generous mentor to a new generation of superstar artists. From performing with Harry Styles and Taylor Swift to collaborating with Miley Cyrus, Nicks has embraced her role as the undisputed matriarch of modern music, passing down her wisdom, her advice, and her blessings to the women and men who now walk the paths she originally blazed. Her legacy is no longer just measured by multi-platinum certifications, sold-out arena tours, or double inductions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It lives on in every young songwriter who picks up a notebook to turn private grief into public poetry, and every performer who steps onto a stage draped in chiffon to claim their power. Stevie Nicks made a conscious choice early in her life to sacrifice conventional domesticity, choosing instead to belong to the whole world forever. She walked through the fires of global fame, devastating heartbreaks, and near-fatal addictions, emerging on the other side not as a tragic relic of rock and roll past, but as an immortal, reigning queen. She remains the ultimate high priestess of rock, unbroken, unbothered, and entirely unrepeatable. From a broke California waitress working double shifts to the undisputed two-time Hall of Fame matriarch of rock and roll, Stevie Nicks proved that raw vulnerability is the most powerful force in music history. She traded standard domestic expectations to belong to the entire world, leaving us with a catalog of anthems that will outlive us all. You think the ultimate love of her life is actually herself? Tell us what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into her life, loves, and music, hit that subscribe button for more rock history.